They looked at his clothes, they looked at his shoes, and in that moment they decided he didn't belong in that room. But what they didn't know was this: the man they were rejecting that day would one day become the reason their entire world came crashing down. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happened next. Before we start, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? His name was Daniel Mwangi, and if you looked at him that morning, dusty shoes, a shirt ironed a little too carefully, a folder pressed tight against his chest, you'd probably think the same thing everyone else thought. Who let him in here? He had taken 3 buses to get to that interview. 3. The first one broke down 2 stops from his house, which meant he walked the rest of the way in the rain. His left shoe had a small tear near the toe. He covered it with black marker the night before. He thought nobody would notice. They noticed. He could tell, by the way. The receptionist glanced down at his feet, then back up at her screen without saying anything. But Daniel didn't come here to make friends. He came here because his grandmother was dying. Her name was Grace, 67 years old, lungs failing. The kind of woman who had never asked anyone for anything her entire life, but now, for the first time, needed everything. The hospital bills were already 3 months overdue. The landlord had already sent 2 notices, and Daniel's mother, his quiet, strong, barely sleeping mother, had started skipping meals so Daniel and his younger sister could eat. He knew. He saw it. She thought she was hiding it. She wasn't. So, when this job posting appeared, senior analyst, Harrington Capital, competitive salary, immediate start. Daniel applied at midnight, rewrote his cover letter 4 times, and prayed in a way he hadn't prayed since he was 12 years old. He needed this, not for himself, for them. The interview room smelled like expensive coffee and leather. There were 4 people at the table. 3 of them barely looked at him. But the 4th one, the one at the head of the table, looked at him the entire time. His name was Marcus Harrington, junior partner, 34 years old. The kind of man who had never had to work for anything in his life, but had convinced himself otherwise. He wore his confidence like a weapon, smiled like he already knew how every conversation was going to end. He looked at Daniel's resume and smiled that smile. You went to Eastfield Community College? The way he said community college, just slightly slower than the rest of the sentence, made 2 people at the table shift in their seats. Yes, Daniel said. And before that you were. Marcus scanned the page. Night security. 4 years I studied during the shifts. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That's admirable. He said admirable the same way someone says, bless your heart. Tell me, Daniel, do you actually think you're qualified for a position at a firm like this? The room went quiet. One of the other interviewers, a woman named Claire, looked at Marcus with a flash of discomfort before quickly looking down at her notes. Daniel breathed once. Yes, he said. I do. Marcus smiled wider. Walk me through your financial modeling experience. And so Daniel did. Quietly, precisely, without showing off. He explained 3 separate valuation models he had built entirely on his own, self-taught, using free online resources and library textbooks. He quoted figures from memory. He referenced case studies that 2 of the other interviewers recognized immediately. The room changed slightly. Marcus felt it, and he didn't like it. So he leaned forward and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, look, I'm going to be honest with you, because I think you deserve that. You're impressive for someone with your background. Truly, but this isn't a place for impressive amateurs. The clients we work with aren't going to sit across from a man in. He glanced at Daniel's shoes. Those shoes, and feel confident about their portfolios. A beat of silence. Someone coughed. Daniel looked at Marcus. Didn't blink, didn't flush, didn't look down. He just said, thank you for your time, picked up his folder, and walked out. 3 days later, he got the rejection email. 1 line, automated, not even from Marcus directly. He read it sitting on his grandmother's hospital bed while she slept. Her breathing was shallow. The machines beeped softly. He stared at the email for a long time. Then he closed his phone, held his grandmother's hand, and made a decision. Not a loud decision, not an angry one, a quiet one. The kind that doesn't make noise when it's born, but shakes the ground when it arrives. Here's what Marcus Harrington didn't know about Daniel Mwangi. He didn't know that Daniel had spent 4 years, working the night shift at data processing warehouse, not because he couldn't find anything better, but because it gave him access to the company's outdated financial servers. Legal access. He'd volunteered to maintain them, and while the rest of the building slept, Daniel studied. Not casually, obsessively. He had notebooks, 17 of them filled front to back, stacked under his bed at home. His mother thought they were journals, they were models, strategies, analyses of publicly traded companies. Predictions, some of them going back 3 years, most of which had come true. He didn't know that Daniel had, 6 months earlier, written a detailed market analysis entirely on his own, emailed it anonymously to a well-known financial blog, and watched it get shared 40,000 times in a single week. Analysts at 3 major firms had discussed it publicly on LinkedIn, calling it quietly brilliant. Nobody knew who wrote it, except Daniel and one other person, a man named Solomon Osei. Solomon was 61 years old, semi-retired, and had spent 30 years building one of the most respected independent investment firms in the country before quietly selling his stake and disappearing from public life. He had a daughter, a garden, and a habit of reading every piece of anonymous financial writing he could find online, because, as he liked to say, the most honest voices are the ones with nothing to prove. He had read Daniel's anonymous analysis twice. Then he traced it. It took him 2 weeks. But Solomon Osei had not built a career on giving up. He found Daniel, and he called him on a Tuesday afternoon while Daniel was eating a meal his mother had cooked: rice, beans, a small piece of chicken, split 3 ways. "I know you wrote it," Solomon said. Daniel stopped eating. "I don't know what you—" The regression model on page 4 has a very specific formatting pattern, unusual one. I've only seen it taught one place, an old open source course from 2019 that almost nobody finished. I finished it. I think you did too. Silence. "What do you want?" Daniel asked. "To talk," Solomon said. "Not over the phone." They met at a small restaurant near the hospital where Daniel's grandmother was being treated. Was still in his work clothes. He was now working days at a print shop. He apologized for being late. Solomon waved it off and said, "Tell me how you think." So Daniel told him. And for the next 2 hours, Solomon Osei, a man who had shaken hands with finance ministers and keynoted international conferences, sat across from a 26-year-old in a slightly too small jacket and listened, really listened. The kind of listening that most successful people forget how to do the moment they stop needing anything from anyone. By the end of the meal, Solomon had said almost nothing. Then he leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "I want to back you." Daniel blinked. "I want to give you the capital to start something. Small, careful, under the radar. If you're right about the 3 positions you just described to me, we'll grow it. If you're wrong, we eat the loss together and you owe me nothing." Daniel stared at him. "Why?" he finally asked. Solomon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because 30 years ago, a man I had never met sat across from me in a room full of people who thought I didn't belong there, and he gave me a chance. I've been looking for the right person to pay that forward to for a very long time." Daniel looked at the table. His jaw tightened. He didn't want to cry in front of this man. He almost did anyway. 6 months passed. Daniel worked during the days, analyzed at night. He and Solomon spoke every Friday morning, always early, always over the phone. They moved carefully, quietly, no announcements. No social media, no press. Grandmother Grace came home from the hospital in month 2. The bills were paid. Daniel told his mother it was a freelance contract. She didn't ask more questions. She just hugged him for a very long time and said, "You are your father's son." His father had died when Daniel was 9. He held on tight and didn't let go for a while. His younger sister, Amara, noticed he was sleeping less. She started leaving a glass of water and a folded napkin on his desk every night before she went to bed. She never said anything about it. Neither did he. But every morning when he sat down to work, the glass was there, and it was enough. These were the things nobody would ever see. These were the things that made him who he was. And then in month 5, the first position paid off, significantly, followed by the second, followed by the third. Solomon called on a Thursday, not the usual Friday. His voice was different. "Daniel," he said, "it's time to register the firm." The name of the firm was Mwangi Capital. Simple, direct, his name on the door for the first time in his life. Solomon handled the legal structure. Daniel handled everything else. 2 analysts, both young, both sharp, one of whom had also been rejected by firms like Harrington, came on board. Word started to spread, not fast, not loudly, but in the specific corridors where it mattered. Small institutional investors, mid-size family offices, a few high-net-worth individuals who were tired of paying premium fees for average results. Mwangi Capital started appearing in conversations. Daniel kept his head down, but the city was starting to talk. Marcus Harrington heard the name for the first time at a dinner party. A colleague mentioned it. "Have you seen the returns this Mwangi outfit has been posting? Completely under the radar. No marketing, just numbers." Marcus smiled his comfortable smile and said, but that night he looked them up, and something shifted in his chest, something uncomfortable. Something he hadn't felt since he was 17, and realized for the first time that someone else in the room was smarter than him. He recognized the name, Daniel Mwangi. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he closed his laptop. He told himself it didn't matter. He was wrong. 3 months later, Harrington Capital lost a major client. The client, a mid-size endowment fund that Marcus had personally managed for 6 years, quietly transferred their entire portfolio to Mwangi Capital. No public announcement, just a letter. Professional, polite. Marcus read it 4 times. He forwarded it to his father, the senior Harrington, the founder, with a single line. "Did you know about this firm?" His father called him within the hour. The conversation was not pleasant. Marcus decided to make a move. He called in favors, spoke to a financial journalist he occasionally fed tips to, suggested a story. Is the Mwangi Capital hype justified, or is this another over-leveraged newcomer waiting to collapse? The article appeared 2 weeks later. It was subtle, careful, nothing defamatory. But it raised questions. It used the word unproven 4 times. It mentioned Daniel's background, the community college, the security job, in a way that felt almost accidental. It was read widely, and for exactly 48 hours it worked. 2 smaller clients called Mwangi Capital with nervous questions. Daniel took every call personally. He answered every question calmly, specifically, with numbers, always with numbers. By the end of the week, both clients had not only stayed, one of them increased their investment. But something else happened too. Someone sent Daniel a screenshot. It was a text exchange between the journalist and Marcus Harrington. Someone at the publication, someone who hadn't appreciated this assignment, had photographed it and sent it anonymously to 3 people in the industry. One of those people forwarded it to Daniel. Daniel read it again, put his phone face down on his desk, and then, for the first time in this entire story, he smiled. Not because he was angry, not because he wanted revenge, because he now understood exactly what kind of man Marcus Harrington was, and exactly how this was going to end. The annual Harrington Capital Investor Gala was held every December. Black tie, downtown hotel, the kind of event that existed mostly to remind everyone in the room that Harrington Capital still mattered. Daniel received an invitation. Not from Marcus, from one of the senior partners, a man named Gerald who had been quietly embarrassed by Marcus's behavior for years. and had, through channels Daniel wasn't fully aware of, been following Mwangi Capital's rise with something close to admiration. Daniel's first instinct was to decline. Solomon called him the night before. Go, Solomon. Simply why? Because you've been building something in private for long enough. It's time to stand in the room. A pause. Wear good shoes, Solomon added, and hung up. Daniel walked into the Harrington Gala at exactly 8:17 in the evening. He wore a suit he had bought 3 weeks earlier, well-fitted, dark charcoal. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He carried nothing, no folder, no portfolio, nothing to prove. He moved through the room quietly. People noticed him, not immediately, but gradually, the way you notice a shift in temperature before you see the open window. He shook Gerald's hand at the entrance. They spoke for a few minutes. Gerald introduced him to two other partners. A cluster of conversation started forming, and across the room, through a gap in the crowd, Marcus Harrington saw him. He went very still. Then he excused himself from his conversation and crossed the room. Daniel. His voice was flat, controlled. I didn't know you were coming. Gerald invited me, Daniel said pleasantly. Good party. Marcus's jaw moved slightly. I heard your firm has been doing well. We're happy with the work. A beat. You know, Marcus said, lowering his voice just enough to feel private, but loud enough for the two people nearby to hear. I have to say, I'm impressed, really. For someone with your starting point to get this far, it's genuinely remarkable. For someone with your starting point hung in the air like smoke. And in that moment, right there, in that ballroom in front of those people, Daniel felt every bus, every night shift, every skipped meal his mother had eaten in silence, every hospital beep, every line in every one of those 17 notebooks. He felt all of it, and he smiled, calmly, genuinely. Marcus, he said quietly, I want to tell you something. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The day I came to interview at this firm, you looked at my shoes. You used that to tell me I didn't belong here. Daniel paused. Do you know why I didn't say anything back? Marcus said nothing. Because I knew, even then, that the shoes weren't the point. The shoes were just what you focused on because you couldn't find anything else. And if the best argument you have against a man is his shoes, Daniel tilted his head slightly, you've already lost the real conversation. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. Two of the nearby guests were no longer pretending to talk to each other. Daniel added very softly, the Delacroix family office is finalizing a transfer to Mwangi Capital next week. You'll see the announcement Monday morning. Have a good evening. He turned and walked away. The Delacroix announcement hit on Monday as promised. $42 million. One of Harrington Capital's oldest clients. 3 generations of relationship transferred in a single letter. By Tuesday, 2 financial publications had picked it up. By Wednesday, Marcus Harrington had been moved out of client-facing responsibilities by his father, quietly, without a press release. By Friday, Daniel's phone had more calls than he could return. He went home that Friday evening, not to an office, not to a celebration, home. His mother was in the kitchen. His sister was doing homework at the table. His grandmother was in her chair by the window, a blanket on her lap, the evening light catching the side of her face. She looked up when he came in. How was your week? She asked. Daniel sat down on the arm of the chair beside her. He looked at her face, every line in it, every year it held. Good, Grandma, he said. Really good. She patted his hand once, the way she always had. I knew, she said simply. He looked at her. I always knew, she repeated. And she turned back to her window. There's something nobody tells you about winning. Not the public winning, not the boardroom kind, or the announcement kind, or the kind that gets written about. The real kind. The kind that happens in a quiet kitchen on a Friday evening, with your grandmother's hand on yours and your sister's pen scratching across a notebook in the background. That kind of winning doesn't make noise. It just sits in your chest, warm and solid, and reminds you why every single hard thing was worth it. Daniel Mwangi didn't become who he was because of talent alone. He became who he was because he was told he couldn't, over and over and over again. And every single time, instead of breaking, he went home, sharpened his pencil, opened his notebook, and kept going. In the quiet, in the dark, in the room where nobody was watching. That's where he won, long before anyone knew his name. And the most dangerous person in any room is always the one nobody thought to worry about. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment? And remember, the most dangerous person in the room is usually the one nobody notices.